Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section of my Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. We are now 1 week away from Christmas. Next week will be Christmas. So in the holiday spirit and everything, I have to plug my Critical Merchandise site. So if you guys haven't checked that out, please do so. I think there's some great holiday gifts there. And also, for new viewers here, I have written a book about Scientology, and a lot of the questions that I get asked are answered in that book. And I really can't recommend that you read it enough, of course. I wrote it. It's called Scientology A to Xenu. It is available on Amazon. There is a link to that below in the comments section this week. So anyway, I just wanted to plug those because it is the holiday season. It is time to plug things. And speaking of plugging things, I also wanted to let everybody know I am on the Scientology in the Aftermath show this week on Monday, tomorrow. Monday night, they are doing a bonus episode. It is a Reddit Q&A episode. So I don't know where they got the idea to call me, for Q&A. I don't know why somebody thought of, me as somebody who should be on that show. But I am, and I got to meet Leah, and of course I've met Mike, and he's a friend of mine, and so we were on the show, and I got to address a couple things. So I hope you guys will check that out. Paulette Cooper, Karen Della Carriere, and Jeff Augustine are also guests on the show, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting stuff. So definitely check it out. It is on A&E. So however you have been watching Leah's show, because I assume a lot of you guys are. If you haven't, it's available on cable or aetv.com, or people have been, downloading the shows, or however you need to see it, just check it out. All right, so all my plugs out of the way. We got some really good questions this week. We're going to get into some heavy stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Jeff Smith. Question. I have heard from you and others that when Scientology is trying to sell people on the cult, they say there is no problem with already being religious, that you can be Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, or anything and still join Scientology, that the religions will not conflict. This is obviously not true, especially with the upper level beliefs on Jesus. So I have a couple of questions relating to that. When and how does the switch happen? When are people no longer allowed to participate in their old religion, and how does Scientology get them to quit? Have you ever witnessed or heard about a hardcore member of another religion giving it up for Scientology, or is it usually people already dissatisfied with their current religion? I'm curious because the promise of keeping your current faith seems like it would be a major selling point for some, but I assume Scientology has to quickly break that promise, and I would think that could be tricky to do with many people. Thanks in advance for your answer. I will tell you about my own personal experience with this. There was a woman in Santa Barbara who we'll call Jane. That was not her name. And she was a Sunday school teacher, and she was a hardcore Christian. And she came into Scientology, and she started doing Scientology, and she was told, exactly like you said, that it's compatible with her belief system. She trained as an auditor, as well as getting lots and lots of auditing, and she paid lots and lots of money for that. And the whole time that she did it, she continued to teach Sunday school. And she thought all along the line that it was fairly compatible with her beliefs, and she never really struggled with it until she did some of that auditor training and heard Hubbard talk in some of his lectures about Jesus and Christianity. And there are a couple lower level lectures where Hubbard flat out says that God is, a bit of a myth, right? In terms of organized religion. He doesn't say there's no such thing as God. He's really deriding organized religion and Christianity in those lectures. So she heard that and kind of thought, well, that's wrong, and I can still maintain my own integrity and my own viewpoint. And she did, and she continued to teach. And it was around the time that she got up to the point of clear that she came and talked to me about this, and we had a long conversation about it, and she told me that her faith had started to break down because of her Scientology beliefs. And I think that's an important point because it's not really ever talked about much in this whole discussion about people of other religions. Scientology is a very intrusive belief system, and it wears at you, right? And it installs ways of thinking and certain ways of looking at the world that are pretty unique. So those views and the belief system of Scientology itself is fairly incompatible with a lot of other religious beliefs, right? So, I mean, the idea of, somebody else, a Jesus Christ figure, Muhammad, whoever, being a savior figure or prophet is completely incompatible with the basics of Scientology, with the basic fundamental idea of you are a spiritual being who is and always has been at cause over your own condition. That those right there, you have incompatibility. So it's not necessarily always the case that the Church of Scientology says you now can no longer be a Christian. That's not how I saw it happen. The way I saw it happen was she, as she became more indoctrinated in Scientology, gave up those beliefs herself. And that was before she ever hit any of the confidential upper level materials. So that's the most direct personal story I have about it. And it's a story that demonstrates, as far as I'm concerned, how probably most people who come into Scientology with religious beliefs end up giving up those other religious beliefs simply because they don't jive with the Scientology belief system. And there's going to come a point at some point along the line of their Scientology indoctrination where they're going to run into a crisis of faith, right? And they're going to have to make a decision. They're going to hit a crossroad at some point, and they're going to go, am I going to continue believing in Jesus Christ as my personal savior, or am I going to keep, whatever the system is? I'm just using Christianity as one example. Scientology is not compatible with almost any other belief system. And in my Deconstructing Scientology series, I've talked about Buddhism, for example, how it's not compatible with that really at all. Even though Scientology says it's all pro-Buddhist and comes from Buddhism and all that, that's all just a bunch of crap. Scientology doesn't have anything compatible with Buddhism. So, same with Christianity, right? So as you go along the line as a Scientologist and you're, going toward personal spiritual freedom and immortality and all that, you're going to find that you're going to have to lose those beliefs yourself. And I never saw somebody come in and have Scientology sit down with them and do an ethics cycle, or have the MAA start going over references with them to handle them on their religion, right? I did see that with homosexuality. I did see that with other, things that Scientology considers unethical behavior, but I never saw that with religious belief. It just sort of breaks down on its own is how I saw it. So hope that gives you some more information about that subject. Linda Richards. Hi, Chris. I know that the cult opens and reads the mail of its members. That is a federal offense. How do they get around that? Okay, let's be real clear about this, because it doesn't read the mail of its members in that, it's public members. People who live in homes of their own and do Scientology services. I mean, they get their own mail, and they, obviously the Scientology doesn't have anything to do with that. When it comes to staff members and Sea Org members, Scientology has a policy that if mail arrives to its location, to the Church of Scientology, it will open that mail. And it's not a federal offense to do that, because the mail was sent to the Church of Scientology. Now, if I send a personal letter to a staff member and I send it to the Church of Scientology and I don't send it to their house, then the Church of Scientology has the right to open that mail. It's their own policy. And the reason the Church of Scientology has the right to do that is because the staff members or the Sea Org members of those churches know that that's the church's policy. They're told that. And they have no expectation of privacy, and they have no expectation that the mail is, in other words, they've agreed that the church can open up their mail. And so that removes it from the category of a federal offense. And I had to learn all of this when I was a staff member in Santa Barbara, because I actually thought the same thing. And I got really pissed one day at the executive director, his name was Doug, because I was like, hey man, you're opening people's mail, that's not cool. And I actually wrote a knowledge report on him. And he saw that and got really jacked, and he took me into a room and showed me the policy about mail opening, and that it was L. Ron Hubbard's orders that all mail to the organization be opened. And he went and checked with the legal director, the director of special affairs there and said, hey, is this true? Is this a federal offense? And the guy was like, yeah, no, it's not a federal offense at all. And so he then came and, set me straight on that. So that's where I kind of learned that lesson myself, and learned that that I did not have any expectation of of privacy if personal mail was being sent to me via the church. And the reason that the church opens all the mail, by the way, is because they want to get the money. If there's money being sent to the church, they want to get it right away. That was the whole point of opening all the mail, not to necessarily read people's secrets or whatever. In the Sea organization, where it's a whole religious order and all that, there is another level of surveillance going on, where they're reading your mail in order to make sure your mom's not telling you that you should leave Scientology. There's that also, as well as looking for money that comes into the organization. And on that point, let me say, if my mom sent me $20, I'd get the $20. I mean money for the organization. I'm not talking about personal money. They don't rip off my personal money out of my mail. But if I was in the Sea Org and my mom or dad or relatives or friends were sending me money, they would come and tell me that they need to not do that, because the Sea Org is supposed to take care of its own, and you're not supposed to be getting gifts and money and things like that from outside sources. So anyway, I'm wrapping a lot of data up into this answer, but I hope that resolves that. Marcy. The Sea Org took my childhood away. I was there from 10 to 20 years old, and at one point it even took my will to live, along with my self-esteem, self-worth, and dreams. Sadly, they also took my belief that I could actually have dreams and reach them one day. So I lived on a hamster wheel for a very long time, until last year. I'm in my 40s now. Happily, I now believe that I do deserve good things, but the scars are still there. I know that if it hadn't been for all the psychological damage, I would have had a different, much better life right now. I can't help but to blame them. So I guess my two questions are, how can I forgive and forget and move on without feeling any more resentment towards the church? And why hasn't Scientology paid yet for what it has done to so many people's lives? Wow, I thank you very much for this question, and I definitely feel, I understand how that feels. When I came out of Scientology and first went down the rabbit hole of finding out all about it on the internet, I was extremely upset. I don't know that there's ever been a period in my life where I have been more angry, more frustrated, more wanting to lash out about having been taken advantage of, about having wasted all those years of my life, about you can't get that back. What do you do? And I channeled that energy into speaking out against it. At first anonymously, I didn't use my real name, but in my anger and upset, and because I kind of wasn't thinking as closely about the situation as I should have been, or carefully rather, about the situation as I should have been at the time, I gave away too much in my anxiousness to hurt the church. I said too much about myself, and so the church figured out who I was, even though I was speaking out anonymously. Now, at this point, I don't regret that, because I believe that trying to go under the radar and speak out is a losing proposition. In the eventuality that because you are trying to hide something from the church, and the second they find out about it and they find out who you really are, now they have something on you. So instead, the next year after I was declared, I decided to start speaking out under my own name. And that, I'm only talking about this because that has been a wonderful form of catharsis for me, is to speak out. Now, whether you do it publicly or not, and it never really has been a safer time to do it than now, the chances of the church, backlash against you are less now than they ever have been, which is no guarantee, of course, of anything, but it's just how things are now. And there are more outlets for that. I mean, even Leah's show is asking for people's stories and asking for people to reach out. But regardless, that has been a great form of catharsis for me, and it's allowed me to unload a lot. Now, you don't have to do it publicly. You could speak out anonymously. You don't even have to speak out in a public forum. Just write stuff down. I've talked about how that alone, just getting it out of your head and onto paper or onto a computer or talking to other people about it it really is helpful. It really is, more so than trying to keep it all contained and bottled in. There's also, of course, there's professional counseling that a person can get. And if you hook up with a counselor, whether it's a cult recovery therapist or a psychologist or family therapist or something like that, as long as they understand or can be made to understand the situation that you're coming from, that can be very, very beneficial. It really sucks when you have a counselor that you have to explain everything to because they're not up to speed. So I wouldn't even bother with somebody like that. But I've done podcasts and interviews with Rachel Bernstein in Los Angeles. That kind of person, somebody who has a background in it. Wonderful, wonderful people, and they do a lot of good in helping to overcome a lot of the resentment and anger and that builds up inside, because believe me, I understand that. I haven't gotten professional counseling myself, but I recommend it for people because I think it can be helpful. My counseling has been this channel, has been my friends, my family, has been downloading a lot, talking to people who understand the situation, and that's the only way I know of that's worked for me. I know it's worked for some other people to just sort of unload all of that burden, right? Now, all that being said, I do want to stress something though. I have not forgived and forgotten. I am still very upset with what Scientology did to me specifically and to my life. I've moved on from that time period. I've moved on from Scientology. My life is now a whole different thing. But I lost a lot. Not just all those years of time in the Sea Org and all that wasted potential, but friends, my fiance at the time, when I left back in 2013. That whole family, that whole situation, all gone, just like that, right? And now forgiveness is a rough thing, okay? I think it's a good thing if you can accomplish it, if you can get there, and but for when it's so personal to you, it can be hard. There are only a couple people still in the Church of Scientology who I find myself unable to understand or forgive for what they did. And those are only really a couple people that, came after me personally, either while I was in or right after I left, right? I don't think it's really, any good to sit here and name who they are. But there are a couple people who were, OSA, ethics people who, were in charge of making sure people disconnected from me and did everything they could to make sure that my bad influence on those people was severed through the disconnection policies. Now here's what I can say about those people as far as my ability to forgive them goes, is I have not forgiven them. I bear them nothing but ill will at this time. But if they were to come out of Scientology, if they were to see the light, so to speak, see the damage and destruction that they've engaged in, if they were to do something that was to demonstrate that they saw that what they did was damaging and destructive, and they were to apologize to me, directly and personally, I would probably forgive them, right? I probably would. But until that day comes, they haven't shown any remorse. They haven't shown any reason to earn my forgiveness. So why would I, right? But like I said, I'm only talking about a couple people. In the general, world of Scientology, the public and the staff and the Sea Org members, I understand why they're in the position that they're in, why they believe the way they do, because I was there. And, and I'm no lily white person on all of this either. I did things that were damaging to people as well. So, and I have asked for, I have apologized when confronted directly on that, Or, when I could, knew somebody that I had damaged and I reached out to them and apologized. So I'm only asking those people that I would, do that for, to do what I did, right? The general run of everybody who's in Scientology and that sort of thing, I don't really have anything against them anymore. For a while I did, about the Sea Org and staff members and stuff. I had some resentment built up towards a lot of those folks. But as I've come to educate and learn, more about the whole situation, destructive cults, undue influence, all that stuff, right? Brainwashing. You see how these people were conned in the same way I was, you were, and so, you just kind of go, okay, well, I can't just hate everybody, and there's no reason to, As far as why Scientology hasn't paid for what it's done to people's lives, I think in a way it has, and it still will. And here's what I mean by that. Scientology is a collective, it's a group of people. It's not, it in of itself can't really pay for much of anything. It's just an idea. L. Ron Hubbard died in a ditch. L. Ron Hubbard died a horrible, alone, hiding from the authorities up in Creston, California, going insane, right? The guy went nuts. And he was that way for a very long time. And he just got worse and worse as the years went on. That, in a way, is paying for his sins, I think in one way or another, there's a form of karma, or you reap what you sow. I think Hubbard eventually did that. I would not have wanted L. Ron Hubbard's life at all, despite the fact that the guy had millions of dollars and all of that. He was a pretty miserable person. And I have to think that the damage that he inflicted on other people throughout his life as a result of what he was doing, his lying, narcissistic ways, and his megalomania made his miserableness the way that it was and drove him insane. And that's how he ended his life, right? So I think he did pay in a way for that. Like, what better comeuppance could he have had, And I don't know if David Miscavige is going to meet that kind of karma or not, but we can hope. This comes down, really looking at this question really in a hard-nosed way. It comes down to the fact that life ain't fair, it never was, and the world is not a just and true place. And so maybe David Miscavige won't ever pay for his criminal activities and the things that he has done. I'd like to think that he will, and I certainly hope that he will, but I don't know if that's a certainty or not, which comes down to then, what do we do about it, right? We who were victimized by this destructive cult, by L. Ron Hubbard's teachings, by David Miscavige's actions and words and orders. We move on. We find some kind of peace within ourselves and some kind of reconciliation with the fact that that's where a part of our life went, and we can't get it back. And so you can carry that burden like hauling a 18-wheeler behind you with a rope. You can carry that burden with you for the rest of your life, or you can kind of let it go. And I don't know what words to say to you that will allow you to let it go. I don't know. But conceptually, that's what I feel I've been doing. And so that's the advice that I would give to anybody else is, that anger and that, there comes a point where you have to let it go. And I know, despite what I've said in this answer earlier about still having, resentment and anger towards those couple people, I know eventually I'll let that go too, right? I really will. It's a lot more real to me now that will happen than it was, say, a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago when it was really fresh, right? So I don't know if any of this is helpful or not, but I thought I would give a stab at throwing an answer at you on this because I do understand, have been there, have done that, and still doing it, and that's really the best I've got for you. You let me know if if that helped at all. David Jordan. Thanks for all you do, especially your book, Scientology A to Xenu. It really detailed some things about Dianetics when it first appeared and then went away that just were not detailed before. My question is this. Before you left Scientology, you had mentioned you started seeing indicators, for example, internet, other research, that led you to believe that Scientology wasn't all they wanted you to believe it was, and you left. But can you please explain how long these thoughts were there before you left Scientology? Also, did you plan your departure hours, days, weeks, months before you finally left? And if you did plan this, did you have any internal Scientology person's help? All right, well, let me tell the story here of how I actually first started getting doubts and reservations about what I was doing with Scientology. In 2002 or 3, somewhere in that time period, I went on a project. I was in the Sea Organization and in management, and I went on this special project to San Diego. And in 3 weeks, we recruited 19, 20 auditors for San Diego org. And by we, I mean the staff. I went down there and I kind of kicked their butts in a really, fun kind of way. It was not rah, 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 yeah, rah, people scrubbing toilets and, doing, all that heavy, labor and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't like that. I went down there and I just said, let's just do this, right? And it was totally impossible, totally crazy to even think it could be done. San Diego was this, kind of medium-sized organization for Scientology that had been limping along for years and was going to keep limping along and has kept limping along for years. And I think they just opened or recently opened up their ideal org, or is going to shortly or whatever. But at the time, they were kind of going nowhere. And we had gotten this big briefing in Los Angeles from Fred Hare. He was an international PR person for Scientology. And he had just come from Russia, and this was back in 2002 or 3, right? So Russia was just taking off with Scientology, and Hungary was just starting with Scientology, and he came and briefed us about how wonderful things were over there and how, on purpose and go get them all the Russians and the Hungarians were. And I was like, fuck this. We can do that. If they can do that there, we can do it here, right? Why not? And so I made it work to get myself down to San Diego to do this project. And we basically accomplished a miracle because, no one goes into, an organization like in Scientology and recruits, 20 people in 3 weeks for, high technical training, because the auditors are people who need to be trained and stuff, right? So it was a big deal. And then I got called back just before we finished, actually. I was down there for about 3 weeks. And it was very, very successful. I mean, how could you not think that was a very, very successful thing to do? This was right before the whole push for ideal orgs and all the renovations and changes. None of that was real yet. We'd been plodding along for years trying to make these orgs go. And the big thing to get done was to get 20 auditors. This was a big, big target for every single org. Not one org had done it in the West US at least. I think maybe 1 on the planet or 2 on the planet had done it. So it was a big deal to go down there and recruit all these people. And so it wasn't like this was a common everyday occurrence. So I didn't necessarily expect a ticker tape parade when I got back, but I did expect, some recognition for what had happened. And I got some. People were very, at the continental level with my fellow managers. They were excited that this had all happened. And they wanted to know how I did it and what happened, what we did. So I did a whole extensive write-up of all the specific things that we did in order to make it happen. And I knew that the only way to make this thing happen was to send somebody to the orgs. Like me, I wanted to now go to the other orgs and make the same thing happen because I knew it took an intense drive to make that happen. It wasn't just sending them, more orders on telexes and emails and stuff saying, hey, get your auditors, because management in Scientology, it sucks. It's horrible. So I knew it would take this kind of direct on-the-ground work to make it happen. And I was very excited about it because I could see, after 8 years of this, I could now see this was how to do it. This was how to make these orgs get big and really take off and really have the ability to deliver Dianetics and Scientology to a lot of people, because 20 auditors is a lot of people. You can get a lot of auditing done with that, right? Well, I came back, I did this whole write-up, we sent it out to all the orgs, and then orders came down from on high, right? Cancel Shelton's orders, just, tell them to play the birthday game, right? Which is just a mantra. It's just, it doesn't mean anything. Play the birthday game. That doesn't mean anything. So this order that came down that canceled everything that I had written up and said and done was extraordinary to me. Like, what? I thought we were all here, like this was sort of like the moment of, what? I thought we were all here to make this happen. Well, it turns out we weren't. We were there to be a bureaucracy and just get orders and send them down and get orders and send them down and run around like chickens with our head cut off if we got some new emergency that came down, right? And that was, pretty standard operating procedure for us. So that was where the light dawned on me that I was involved with an organization that didn't care about expanding its organizations and trying to actually make something effective happen. I was in a hamster wheel. That's the moment I realized it. It took 10 more years for me to realize that the organization was not just corrupt at the management level, but at all levels. It took, me having to realize that it wasn't, my overts and withholds, it wasn't my transgressions, it wasn't, because I was a bad person, had been doing bad things, that I was viewing the organization in a skewed fashion, which is what Hubbard says. I had to do that whole RPF program for 3 years. I went through a number of things in order to finally realize 10 years after that initial realization about San Diego that I was in a totally corrupt organization and I needed to get out of it. And that was when I left the C organization. And that occurred to me on the eve of my 42nd birthday in December of 2011. And I was on a mission in Twin Cities at that time, and I wanted to finish that mission because I felt I owed it to the people of Twin Cities to finish what I started there. But, a couple months later, and I didn't tell anybody. I told my parents, and that was it. I had no inside help or anything. So then 3-4 months later, I'm back in LA, and that's when I said I want to leave. And then, 8-9 months later, I was out. So that's kind of how the sequence of events on that goes. But that was that project and me being in management and seeing, how horrible the whole thing was in terms of it saying it wanted one thing, but then doing something completely the opposite. That was the moment of truth for me, and it was all sort of downhill from there. Pat, I enjoy your Q&A videos and hope you will answer my question one day. Do ex-Scientologists go into sales after they leave Scientology? I wonder this because I hear so much about how Sea Org people have to sell books, auditing sessions, and ask for donations. I figure they must be good at sales and enter into MLMs or some other sales type of business. No, not really. In fact, I don't know any Sea Org members who have left or Scientologists who've left Scientology and then gone off into sales. I know some people who've started their own businesses and sales are part of that. But I do know there are a lot of Scientologists who go into sales because they get money on commission and that sort of thing. And the people who run those companies, those wise companies, those companies that are part of Scientology's whole structure and are using Scientology technology, those guys who run those corporations want Scientologists to work for them because they don't have to pay them that much. And they just pay them commissions, right, off the sales. So I know it's more common with Scientologists to get involved in sales than it is ex-Scientologists. I, for example, am a great salesman, but I hate sales. Hate it. I mean, I could do it. I did it for a long time. And I learned everything I know about sales from Scientology. But I don't want to do sales. I don't like doing that. So, so there you go. It's flash answers. Must be what it is. Nick Aloha. Is the truth rundown a major part of getting out of the RPF? Do you have to re-understand that you, the individual, were at cause over matter and ultimately you are responsible? Yes and yes. Scientology is all about personal responsibility and how everything is your fault. And nothing bad that ever happens to you is ever anybody else's fault except yours. The Church of Scientology is incapable of error, incapable of doing something against you. It's always you who, pulled it in, made it happen, somehow morally transgressed in that direction. And as far as the truth rundown on the RPF, yeah, pretty much everybody gets the truth rundown, or almost everybody. And that's short answer. I Heart Sydney. You say LRH believes some of his own stuff. I just listened to the recordings Tony Ortega uploaded where LRH talks about the invader forces. I'm assuming he was bullshitting people and didn't believe any of it. But it actually takes guts to talk that much bullshit. Wasn't he scared that this is just too much and people might turn away from him after listening to this ridiculous tale? Actually, the truth is, I believe that L. Ron Hubbard did believe some of that stuff. I don't think he thought that he was conning a bunch of people when he started talking about past track incidents, whole track incidents, space opera stuff. I think he thought that stuff was real. And he certainly bought into it years later. If he didn't believe it at first, he certainly bought into it hook, line, and sinker as the years went on. Hubbard was a complex individual, but he was a very mentally off person. And I know it's a little hard to, reconcile all of it because of that complexity, but that is where he was coming from, which is why I believe he was able to be so passionate about Scientology and Scientology's beliefs, however odd they were. And that was what imbued him with the charisma and the determination to get that information across to his followers in such a way that they would buy it. And through the early 1950s, he managed to pull it off. So there's that. Gary Page. Are all psychiatrists intrinsically and irredeemably evil according to Hubbard? If so, how did Scientologists square this with the fact that CCHR was co-founded by a psych? Yes, Scientology believes that all psychiatrists are evil to the core. Thomas Szasz was a reformed psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist who dared to be a whistleblower and speak out against psychiatry. As a professor of psychiatry emeritus, he helped found the Citizens Commission on Human Rights because he thought, as a reformed psychiatrist, that the whole system was in error and faulty and wrong to some degree or another, and he was willing to side with the Church of Scientology in order to institute reform within the world of psychiatry. He was already on that crusade, I believe, when Scientology found him. And so Scientologists would say to themselves, or would reconcile that with, oh, he turned from the dark side. He was reformed in the same way you might think, Darth Vader reformed, right? When he finally went and killed the emperor. It would be that kind of a reformation. So that's how they reconcile that. Okay, and that's all we have time for this week. I hope you found some of those answers illuminating or helpful or interesting in some fashion or another. Thanks for coming around. Leave any questions, comments, feedback, good, bad, or ugly, in the notes in the comments section below on my YouTube channel. And I hope to see you guys watching tomorrow on A&E. Okay, see my bright smiling mug along with Leah Remini and everybody else on that great show. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.